Okay, so welcome to the part 5 on the seedless plants here. The first 4 parts we covered the evolutionary history of plants, but then we also looked at that broad category we called the bryophytes and looked at the liverworts, the mosses, and the hornworts. So collectively, when you think about those 3 groups, I want you to think about them here's just a general way to organize them. We're going to organize them as non-vascular seedless plants. So again, the bryophytes, which include liverworts, mosses, oh, that should be liver, mosses, and hornworts. Okay, so those are the ones we kind of group or oh, that needs to be back up there. We group or organize together under that non-vascular seedless plant heading. So the next group we're going to go into are known as the vascular seedless plants. All right, so vascular. So these guys now have a vascular system. And a key feature or structural feature required for a vascular system is this thing called the trachea or tracheids. All right, so not trachea like what we have in the human body and the respiratory system, but tracheids. Tracheids, kind of generically, we call these plants the tracheophytes because all of these plants will have those structures. This allowed them to get bigger, to grow taller, to be able to compete better against the non-vascular plants. So the earliest vascular plant to appear on land is this plant called Cooksonia. So you can think about it. If you have a liverwort growing here, or an ancestor of a liverwort, or maybe some moss. All right, so this stuff's only a couple centimeters, if that, in height. And now evolution causes this plant known as Cooksonia. Cooksonia evolves and it gets a little bit bigger. So it's still not a crazy tall plant over here, but it's a couple centimeters taller than the liverworts, the mosses, and I could even throw in the hornworts. So fossil evidence shows that the earliest vascular plant showed up about 410 million years ago. So earliest plant evolution was roughly 450 million years ago when plants evolved to terrestrial existence. So here's our 450 million year old groups. And then this new upstart 410 million years ago starts to get a little bit taller. So I want you guys to think about it and write down 3 things, 3 advantages that Cooksonia would have had over a liverwort, or that Cooksonia would have had over moss, etc. What is the advantage that Cooksonia or the vascular plants had? What made them more competitive? Okay, so when we look at all of the vascular plants, we can generically kind of categorize them as tracheophytes because they have the tracheids, that particular structure we talked about in the previous lectures. So what we want to do is take a quick look at kind of the key features of the tracheids, the tracheophytes. What do these guys have that we see kind of common across all of the tracheophytes, all the vascular plants? And then as we get into different groups, we'll talk about kind of, okay, how did this group modify, or I don't want to say manipulate, but adapt certain features to become adaptable in different environments. Okay, so let's start with key features of tracheophytes. First one is called homosporous. I'm going to move some of this stuff so we have more room. Okay, so homosporous means you're producing one type of spore. So as a plant, you're producing spores that are basically all the same size, same general type of spore. They're not genetically identical, so don't think that. But structurally, they're all similar. And I'll explain as we go through the plants what happens when you get into heterosporous, which means two or different types of spores. So we got that as a key feature of many of the early tracheophytes. Vascular tissue. So if I'm going to get bigger, I need to be able to conduct nutrients and fluids through tissues. Non-vascular plants just rely primarily on diffusion and osmosis for water absorption. They don't have to worry about conducting fluids or nutrients or anything several centimeters or feet or meters from one location to the next. So they could be small, flat, diffusion work just fine. But if you're getting bigger, you can't rely on that. So vascular tissue conducts nutrients and, well, we could say nutrients, minerals, and fluids. So obviously water, things like that. So the primary tissue types, and we'll discuss this later, that the primary vascular tissue types are xylem and phloem. So xylem is mostly working with water and minerals. Phloem is going to be working primarily with sugars. So, well, let's add hormones in there. So what we'll see is a pattern where in general, a pattern where xylem is carrying things up in the plant, phloem is carrying things down. So roots to shoots, shoots back down to roots. So again, we'll come back to this at a later point. Vascular tissue also allows for an increase in size of the plant. So a huge advantage if you can get bigger because of vascular tissue. Other big key features. Cuticles. So this waxy layer that protects the plant. And we can see that in the picture down here, this kind of pinkish colored layer that is a cuticle. Excuse me, that helps protect the plant, decreases water loss. Huge, huge feature, especially if you're going to get big and you're going to evolve to living in an environment away from water or with limited water. The stomata that's that opening for gas exchange. So those little pores, or stoma, singular here, those little openings there, that allows gas to be exchanged. So if you have a waxy layer where you're blocking the loss of water, while you're also blocking the movement of gases, the stomata still allow for the movement of gases. Very important for photosynthesis. And then leaves. Leaves, basically, they're increasing surface area. They're allowing a greater, or providing a greater surface area that enables the plants to absorb more solar energy. And what we'll see with leaves leaves underwent this really amazing little evolutionary journey in which the earliest evolution were these things called lycophils, just basically little buds, not real not real expansive, just kind of a singular vascular strand. And then, as always with evolution, it's all about competition. The earliest plants to have leaves were these things called club mosses. So they are considered seedless vascular plants, or the tracheophytes, single vascular strand here. But then as, again, competition and, well, you got a leaf, now I need to photosynthesize better than you. What can I do to outcompete you? Well, I start to make my leaf bigger, and I start to branch and have vascular strands within my leaf. This leads to a type of leaf we call a megaphyll. So up here, microphyll. And then down here, the megaphyll. Mega just means bigger. Okay, so branched vascular strands, much more surface area. So this is where we get into lots of other plants, things like ferns, horsetails. These are going to be some of the groups we will be discussing soon here. Horsetails, etc. So, okay. All right. So those are kind of the key evolutionary traits, features of the tracheophytes. So here's a nice table to work with, gives us a general picture of what we're looking at. There's a little bit of reorganization within the plant world here, but what I want you guys to do is use this table to look at what are kind of the key characteristics of each group. Do not worry about number of species. That's a moving target, and that's not really that important. I don't want you guys to memorize 15 species of horsetails and 6 of these. That's not relevant to what we're discussing. I just want you to understand the big feature. What's a club moss? What traits and characteristics identify it as a club moss? And then what makes something a fern versus a horsetail versus etc. So again, work with a table. We're going to go through this, talk about these different groups, but that table is a good reference for you guys to fall back to say, hey, this is this is a key characteristic of this particular group. So, okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to pause it here. It's a little early, but I want to shut it down here. And then when we come back, we're going to play an evolutionary game to see who would survive the evolutionary process. Okay, so come back for part 6 and we'll get into the evolution of vascular systems.